What weapons are going to be good next week? The launch of Heresy. Bungie hosted their Heresy Act 1 dev stream, and we got to see a little bit of what we're going to be tackling in the next episode. They even dropped the TWAB disclosing all the new artifact mods we're going to be getting, as well as the return of particle reconstruction, or at least back in the day it was particle deconstruction. But if y'all remember this mod, it essentially made linears and fusion rifles absolutely meta for an entire season. Now, there was a lot shown to us in terms of our artifact mods. The big ones that stand out though are things like Overload Machine Gun, Barrier Sidearm, Anti-Barrier Sniper Rifle, Unstoppable Glaive, Linear and Fusion Rifle Unstoppable, with a host of other mods in here that dip into things like Arc, Void, some Scran also sprinkled in there. So with all this in mind, guys, this brings us to today's video. This is our list of weapons that we suggest having for the upcoming sandbox. So without further ado, let's begin. First on the list, we have Vex Mythoclast. If you remember way back when particle deconstruction was in rotation, Vex Mythoclast was one of the clear meta options for that season, because despite it shooting like an auto rifle, it's actually classified as a fusion rifle and it takes primary ammo. Combine this with the exotic catalyst for this weapon, you're able to self buff, and then upon getting enough charges, you can hit the reload function to now give yourself 3 linear shots. I think Vex Mythoclast has been severely overlooked, considering that just in season 23, Bungie gave Vex Mythoclast's linear shot a 200% buff against champions. And with the ability for Vex Mythoclast to stunt unstoppable champions, the synergy that it can gain with things like Defibrillating Blast, which grants maximum stacks of bolt charge upon stunning a champion, while simultaneously triggering an arc bolt that heals you and jolts combatants that it damages, and the buff that we should be getting from particle reconstruction, Vex Mythoclast is positioned to be very good in this next sandbox, which is perfect because Vault of Glass and its loot is actually getting a refresh. All of the weapons are going to be craftable. So if you're like, Cross, how can I even get Vex Mythoclast? Don't worry, people are going to be doing Vault of Glass very soon. Now, our next weapon on the list, and one that's going to take full advantage of particle reconstruction, is none other than Merciless. Guys, we did damage testing just the other day, and man, it is crazy just how powerful Merciless is. With its perk Conserve Momentum, which allows you to blow die load extremely fast, with Impetus, which gives you that 50% damage buff for 4.5 seconds when reloading after a kill. You combine this with particle reconstruction. There's a reason why people use Merciless for low mans and also for soloing content, and that's because it puts out. And with the lineup of Unstoppable Fusion, Defibrillating Blast, and Particle Reconstruction, Merciless is going to be nuts. Our next weapon on the list is another fusion rifle, guys, one of which is getting a complete rework, and that's Telesto. Now, Telesto, of course, just like other fusion rifles here, are going to be taking advantage of particle reconstruction, but Telesto itself is getting changed in Heresy. Now, the rework consists of multiple changes related to its intrinsic perk and catalyst. The first change was to Harbinger's Pulse, where now it only refills Telesto's ammo from reserves, instead of Telesto in your kinetic slot weapon. Now, to make up for this, though, it can now trigger with any type of Void Final Blow. If you've seen our artifact mods, Void is going to be popping off. Now, on top of that, the catalyst is receiving a new perk called Harbinger's Seeth. Now, this states that after 3 activations of Harbinger's Pulse, you get special reload with a weapon, which, quote, will cause a rain of Telesto projectiles on your next direct hit. Now, we have not seen this in action. I don't know if this is going to be comparable to like Old God's Right. I don't know if it's going to be like Wild Card when you kill champions. I'm not going to lie, guys, a catalyst like this could really break the game. Telesto already breaks the game half the time by itself. Now you're going to give us the ability to rain Telesto projectiles? Even if this is not that crazy, keep in mind, Telesto is a void weapon, which can take advantage of things like Volatile Marksman, where we grant ourselves volatile rounds on rapid void final blows, which would then allow us to take advantage of Malign Harvest, where rapidly applying volatile causes your next instance of void weapon damage, creates a weakening burst. Then from there, you have Void Flux in column 5, which states that defeating those weakened targets with a void weapon applies volatile to those nearby targets, with powerful targets increasing the radius of that explosion. Alternatively, you can also run something like volatile or a weakening build to really just get this ball rolling. I love the idea of breaking out Telesto in in-game content. And with the rework here, we may be in a situation where Telesto won't just be looked at as a meme weapon, but actually be a contender in in-game content. And what I really love about Telesto is the way in which it works. Keep in mind, when you shoot the weapon, it applies the impact damage, but then the Telesto crystals explode. What that really means is for something like particle reconstruction, the impact of that burst course, will apply that buff, which in theory should mean that the crystal detonations should be able to take full advantage of particle reconstruction without having to waste that entire first shot from your fusion. Now, the next weapon on the list, and I cannot believe I'm saying this, Queenbreaker bow. This is a linear fusion rifle that's been with us since Forsaken. And even though Bungie is trying to buff this thing multiple times, no one has been like, yo, we're about to do that GM Nightfall. Bring your Queenbreaker. Now, if it was just getting the 10% buff that all of the linear fusion rifles were getting with the launch of Heresy, I probably wouldn't be putting it on the list. But Queenbreaker specifically is getting an entire rework. Essentially, players will now have the ability to special reload at any time to swap between its two scopes, that combat scope and that marksman scope. Now, marksman sight retains the previous behavior of firing a single shot that chains nearby targets and blinds them, with that range of that chain being increased from 8 to 10 meters. But combat sights is what's getting the big change. This will now alter the weapon to fire a 3-round burst at a charge time of 533, with sustained damage on a target decreasing that charge time all the way down to 300. Guys, if you play with linear fusion rifles, or really just fusion rifles, you know 300 charge time, you're practically firing that thing at full auto. Like, at that point, it's like an automatic linear fusion. Now, in terms of artifact synergy, our first pick is going to be particle reconstruction for that damage increase and that magazine reload. And then, of course, we have unstoppable fusion, linear fusion, and defibrillating blast that we can combo with for easy champion takedowns, while also having the ability to blind enemies while using marksman sights. And considering that blind is a debuff, we can take advantage of dielectric to give us bolt charge, as well as the boost, which gives us orbs of power and health. We'll see how this rework shapes up. And as we touched up here recently in our damage testing video, Queenbreaker's bow, its biggest constraint is going to be its magazine size. But with it dropping to a 3-round burst in its combat sight form and the ability to go down to 300 charge time, hot damn it, it may actually be meta. Now, if it turns out that this change is completely poop, well, guys, you can't go wrong with Sleeper Simulants. I know a lot of people are going to say Cross is just boring to even throw Sleeper on the list, but Sleeper chunks, man, and it's going to chunk even more with particle reconstruction. Now, moving on from our exotics, let's talk some legendary linear fusions. The reason why legendary linear fusions are going to be so good is because you can rock an exotic elsewhere. So for instance, if you were to rock Vex Mythoclast, you could do so while also having a very good legendary linear in your back pockets. One of the most reliable linears in the game right now is Scintillation. This is one of our vanguard weapons, and it has fantastic perk options such as rewind rounds, bait and switch, and the also wonderful Vice Stinger as its origin traits. For many, I do believe that this strand linear fusion, which is an adaptive burst linear, is going to be your first option amongst legendaries. However, if any of you farmed out a Mistral lift over the holidays, I actually think Mistral might be potentially better than Scintillation. And that's because Mistral comes with the perk Withering Gaze. Now, Mistral is also an adaptive burst. It also has origin traits like Vice Stinger. And yes, it has great combinations like Envious Arsenal or Envious Assassin with bait and switch. Keep in mind, Envious Assassin conflicts with Vice Stinger because it overfills the magazine. Vice Stinger only works with the base mag of a weapon. But what makes Mistral potentially a fantastic option is the perk Withering Gaze. Aiming this weapon for a short period of time without firing grants the ability to weaken the next target, timer resets after firing, or when you stop aiming down sights. Think of this perk as like box breathing. You aim down sights, after about a second and a half, it will now allow your weapon to apply a debuff to the target. Now, the reason why I believe this is going to be good is that particle reconstruction, at least in the wording of the artifact mod, seems more like a buff rather than a debuff. You see, particle deconstruction, the original artifact mod, was a debuff for your linear fusion rifles and fusion rifles, and it would not stack with other debuffs. Again, that's the thing in Destiny. Debuffs and buffs don't stack unless they're weapon independent. Bigger number always takes priority unless it's bugged. If particle reconstruction is in fact a debuff, then ignore everything I say about Mistral Lift. Withering Gaze is pointless, as the debuff from particle would be more than that than Withering Gaze, or at least more than likely. However, if it is a buff to linears and fusion rifles, now you have the ability to buff your weapon, and you have the ability to debuff the target with Withering Gaze. I do not believe particle reconstruction is going to be the 40% damage increase that we've received in the past from particle deconstruction. However, with Withering Gaze, we could potentially get to that point. So although this may not be the best for DPS rotations, for chewing out a couple champions here and there, Absolutely. Now, I'm going to be honest, guys, I can ramble on and on about linear fusion rifles, from the potential of Briar's Contempt with Harmonic Resonance, Line in the Sand, where you can get roles like Deconstruct and Bait and Switch together, but most will say that I am going down Copeland at that point, so I'm going to leave it at that and move away from linear fusion rifles. Overall, though, guys, if it isn't clear by now, fusion rifles and linear fusion rifles are looking to be pretty potent next week. Then the next fusion rifle on the list, one of which we saw gameplay of just the other day, and one that was meta back during Season of the Plunder. Delicate Tomb, we believe, is going to be very strong in Heresy. Now, I actually misspoke when I said that Delicate Tomb fell within the same aggressive frame archetype, but Bungie has already mentioned in the TWAB that Coriolis is one of that archetype. And the only thing that Delicate Tomb has in common with Coriolis is the ability to shoot itself horizontally. And for those that are not familiar with this fusion rifle, that's exactly what its bolt pattern does. Its spread is horizontal, at least when you fire from the hip. What Delicate Tomb is getting, though, is a host of reworks, which is hitting the exotic specifically. The changes include increasing the chance to make an ionic trace for minor combatants from 4% to 10%. They've also increased the PvE damage bonus on Tempest Cascade from 30% to a whopping 100%, which is the overcharged shot that you get after picking up an ionic trace that can also jolt targets on hit. And lastly, Bungie is removing the timer from Tempest Cascade so that the buff lasts until fire. This change alone provides so much more utility, as you can hold that overcharged shot for a target deserving of it. Now, keep in mind, guys, we're also getting 3 new arc aspects for this episode. Arc is going to be the flavor for this season. Without a doubt, guys, I was already going to be using this fusion rifle with particle reconstruction and defibrillating blasts, overclock and load, as well as flashover. I'm sure the build ideas are just pouring into you right now. Delicate Tomb was already going to be a first choice for myself, especially when playing Warlock with things like Fallen Sunstar. Those two exotics are just made for each other. You tack on the individual buffs that this exotic is already receiving, Delicate Tomb is going to far outpace everything that it did back in Season of the Plunder. Now, the next weapon we have on this list is a copium choice by my editing crew, D.A.R.C.I. Now, I know some of you like, Cross, why would you ever agree to this weapon to be on your list? Listen, I try to tell him there is no way D.A.R.C.I. is going to suddenly become meta, but on the off chance that it does, we have to put it on the list. You see, D.A.R.C.I. is about to become the Gjallarhorn of sniper rifles. Not only is Bungie going to be increasing its damage with target acquired, as well as like some flinch resistance buffs and accuracy buffs, the big change that D.A.R.C.I. is getting is a new catalyst perk called Networked Targeting. This states that hits with personal assistant active grants you and nearby allies improved overall weapon performance and precision damage with non-exotic sniper rifles. Now, keep in mind, guys, this is just for legendary sniper rifles, but look no further, fellas, than something like Supremacy, right? Rapid fire sniper rifles do put out, and considering that we do have anti-barrier sniper rifles, look, it could be good, man. We take the buff that D.A.R.C.I. is granting us here, we may be in a scenario in which people are actually breaking out sniper rifles for damage phases and relying on one user using D.A.R.C.I. to buff the damage of everyone else. We'll see how it plays out, but I can't deny that this is a unique twist to D.A.R.C.I. that I never expected. Now, on the topic of sniper rifles, I'm gonna bring up one that is not necessarily good for DPS, but it's fantastic for utility, and that is the sniper rifle Critical Anomaly. Now, this is the Salvation's Edge sniper rifle, and if you've got the craftable roll, this weapon will serve you well. Critical Anomaly has the ability to roll chill clip, and since we have anti-barrier sniper rifle this season, you essentially have a sniper that could stun all 3 champion types. You've got chill clip with the ability to slow and stun overload champions. You could proc the freeze and shatter to stun unstoppable champions, and then anti-barrier for the ability to stun barrier champions. Again, not necessarily a weapon I would bring in to DPS rotation. It's an aggressive frame sniper rifle, and they fall way behind on the DPS list. But in terms of utility, you can't deny Critical Anomaly possesses that. The next weapon on the list is a weapon that I picked as my #1 top choice from the Revenant episode, and that is Tinasha's Mastery. This is the Ironbender rocket-assisted sidearm. And let me just say, guys, this weapon is beautifully positioned to take full advantage of anti-barrier sidearm next week. Just like Critical Anomaly, Tinasha can roll with chill clip, which will allow it to stun all 3 champion types, overloads, unstoppables, and barriers barriers all in one go. Now, rocket sidearms are getting hit with some changes here, including reduced PvE detonation damage by 45%, but they've increased the PvE impact damage by 100%. We'll see how that shakes out. They're also being hit with reduced aim assist and magnetism fall off, and they're reducing damage by 30% versus bosses, vehicles, and mini boss targets. Again, we'll be looking at this pre versus post, but utility-wise, Tinasha is going to be a fantastic choice, potentially the best choice amongst all rocket-assisted sidearms. Now, our next weapon on the list actually encompasses a lot of different things. That's pretty much any weapon that can roll destabilizing rounds. For the longest time, I felt like destabilizing rounds has been overlooked, and for good reason. In comparison to things like jolting feedback, bolt shot, incandescent, destabilizing rounds just fell behind. Now, the perk reads that weapon kills cause enemies to explode into a burst of void energy, applying volatile to enemies within a 6.5 meter radius. Now, the change Bungie is making in Heresy is that it will now grant volatile rounds for 2 seconds if any targets are hit by the volatile burst from the initial final blow, along with the internal cooldown being reduced from 4 seconds to 1.5 seconds. Let me just say that cooldown being dropped from 4 seconds to 1.5 seconds is huge. That's been one of the main things holding back volatile now for so long, is that cooldown. TLDR on this one, volatile just got more kabloomies, and this season it's especially going to be good with artifact mods like Volatile Marksman, which reads that rapid void weapon precision hits and rapid void weapon final blows grant volatile rounds, with a boost that provides class ability energy when creating volatile detonations. For my Gerfalcon users, this one's going to be amazing. Another mod that we could take advantage of is Maligned Harvest, where rapidly applying volatile causes your next instance of void weapon damage to create a weakening burst, with the boost that states that applying weaken provides a small void overshield. And this pairs especially nice with Void Flux in column 5, where defeating weakened targets with a void weapon applies volatile to nearby targets. Powerful targets increases the radius of the explosion. Now, you can imagine so many weapons that would work beautifully with these artifact mods and the reworked volatile. Weapons like Choir of One, which can slot destabilizing rounds. Listen guys, this weapon already hits like a truck. Even with the nerfs and the pullback on its ammo, it's still a very strong weapon, and it's only going to get a lot stronger. We have Insurmountable, which is the sidearm from this past episode, which can roll things like destabilizing rounds. Hand cannons like Ancient Gospel, which can roll destabilizing Word of Crota, Mahi's HC4. We even have auto rifles like Reckless Oracle that can roll destabilizing rounds, or Riposte for my Crucible players that farmed it. No, we don't have anti-champion capabilities for these weapons outside of Insurmountable, but they're still going to be very solid, with destabilizing going from a somewhat C tier perk to potentially now an S tier perk after this update. So check through your vault, guys. Look for some weapons that you have destabilizing rounds on and get ready to go crazy. Now, I know a lot of eyes right now are on the new weapons coming next season, including the new aerial denial frame grenade launcher, which I believe is going to be very, very good. However, on the topic of destabilizing rounds, the Vespers host grenade launcher, Velocity Baton, I believe is going to be disgusting. In our original review, we talked about the God roll being the attrition orb roll, and that's still a very good roll. But also in that same column, you have destabilizing rounds. You see, Velocity Baton is an aerial denial frame GL. It does damage over time, the pulls last for 5 seconds, and destabilizing rounds is going to be changed to have a 1.4 second cooldown. So I think you can see where we're going with this. If your initial volatile burst from a kill hits any target, you'll receive volatile rounds for 2 seconds and will be continuously doing more damage and proccing itself with other kills. You can run Maligned Harvest for the weakening burst on void kills after rapidly applying volatile. Void Flux for when you defeat those weakened targets so that you'll apply an additional burst of volatile. And then on top of that, you can run Volatile Marksman so that those rapid void weapon kills are also granting volatile rounds. We're expecting this to be pretty nuts. So if you got time this weekend, guys, get your Vesper farming on. See if you could snag a Velocity Baton roll with destabilizing rounds, as I think this one's going to be pretty disgusting in Heresy. Now, I know this list is already kind of crazy as is. Seems like we've been adding things left and right, and it's ballooned to what it is now, but we got to talk about Glaives. Bungie is adding a host of glaive changes across the board in Heresy, including some changes to our exotic glaives, and on top of that, a ton of artifact mods. At the start of next week, glaives will be receiving significantly increased aim assist, aim magnetism, and damage fall off ranges for all archetypes of glaives. They're also being hit with improved projectile hit registration, increased baseline effects at all stat values for handling speeds, including the shield ready speed and draw and stow speeds, its mag size, its projectile speed, and its reload speed. Now, along with those changes, the final hit of the melee combo is now going to deal double damage, making it worth going through your entire melee rotation while using a glaive. Now for our exotic class-specific glaives, the special shot will no longer be tied to the glaive energy and will now be triggered on 6 weapon hits to allow the special reload, whether that be from the melee hit or from its projectiles. Our Hunter Glaive, Edge of Concurrence, will now have jolting feedback added to its intrinsic perk. Our Titan Glaive, Edge of Action, will be receiving the effects of destabilizing rounds added to its intrinsic perk. And our Warlock Glaive, Edge of Intent, will have Incandescent added to the intrinsic perk while also adding a Cure Pulse to the special shot on impact. Along with this, the healing turret no longer targets allies at full health, and instead will target the allies whose shields have been damaged. Now, in addition to all these is the banger artifact mods we have going for glaives. Starting with the anti-champion capabilities, we've got Unstoppable Glaive in the first column. In the third column, we have Hold the Line, which reads that while surrounded, machine guns and glaives gain increased reload speed and stability. Final blows heal you. Now, the main thing being here is that while you are surrounded, which is pretty much all the time with the glaive, you'll be healing when getting those kills. Now, the final mod that directly affects glaives is No Bell, which reads that rapid glaive melee final blows grant special ammo glaives additional ammo. Blocking damage with glaives increases their melee damage to targets. So just by using our glaive and getting kills, we'll be producing ammo along with receiving a damage buff for simply blocking. Now, we'll have to see what that percentage is, but we have many ways that we can buff our glaive damage already. No lie, guys, I've been extremely skeptical about glaives ever being a part of our meta, but seeing the reworks here and the artifact mods, I'm hopeful. It's obviously a playstyle Bungie wants us to lean into. Now, outside of the exotic class glaives, there's a ton of very solid legendary options, from Rake Angle, which has the ability to roll chill clip, so you can stun unstoppable champions and overloads. We have void options like Ecliptic Distaff, OGs like Judgment of Kel'Garath, and I also got to bring up Winter Bites, our only heavy exotic glaive. No, it won't be receiving the ammo provided by Nobel, but you will get the damage increase when you block, which should pair very nicely with the weapon's traits, Weighted Edge, which also gives Winter Bite a damage buff. So yeah, going into this next episode, guys, don't sleep on glaives. Now, to round out our list of weapons here, let's bring it back to sidearms. First, I'm going to bring up the #1 weapon back when Final Shape launched, that being the Call. Now, I know rocket assisted sidearms are being toned back a bit. However, we've got some great artifact mods that are going to be boosting this strand rocket assisted sidearm. From Anti-Barrier Sidearm being present this season to Unraveling Orbs, which is making a return in Column 2. This mod provides unraveling rounds to strand weapons upon picking up an orb or a tangle. And since the Call is craftable, and I'm sure many of you already have it, we have complete control over making this thing work the best way possible with our artifact mods. You can roll Slice, which pairs perfectly with our third column artifact mod, Disruptor Spike, which improves the effects of Exhaust and Sever, lowering a target's damage output even further. Again, Exhaust is a new status effect that Bungie is adding this coming episode. We have a returning mod, Horde Shuttle, which will be dropping in Column 4, which occasionally spawns a Threadling when damaging an unraveled target, with a boost that Threadling sever targets they damage. And considering that the Call can also roll Hatchling, this would essentially allow us to sever even more targets that our Threadlings are damaging. Now, this of course moves the weapon away from being a damage dealer to more of an ad clearing weapon, which I honestly feel like that's probably going to be the route of rocket assisted sidearms anyways. With us not having the ability to regenerate health passively in activities like the Nether, we're going to be looking for ways to mitigate damage as much as possible. So for myself personally, I'm going to be leaning into weapons that deal Sever and Exhaust. Now, to the topic of strand sidearms, we gotta bring up the king, and potentially the king of all sidearms, and that's the Sidearm Final Warning. This weapon dropped in Lightfall, and it comes with a perk all at once. We're holding down the trigger, marks targets within range, and loads multiple bullets, which fire in a burst with increased stability on trigger release. Hitting a marked target with a fully charged burst will unravel them. Now, when you pair this with its other perk, Pick Your Poison, this allows your hip fire projectiles to track those marked targets, dealing increased body shot damage on impact. But when you aim down sights, your projectiles now have greatly increased velocity, and they deal extra critical hit damage to marked targets, which, by the way, is a 100% increase in damage. If you got the Catalyst, guys, this is an additional 10% increase towards those marked targets and 5% toward bosses and mini bosses, with hits from the weapon having a 25% chance to refill 1 ammo. Let me just say, the base version of Final Warning is really good, but with us having it with Anti-Barrier Sidearm, Unraveling Unraveling Orbs, Horde Shuttle, which by the way is going to beautifully synergize with Final Warning, considering that damaging unravel targets with the weapon occasionally spawns a threadling. Hot damn it, fellas. It's doing that naturally. Look, I don't know when the last time my warlocks have broken out their swarmers, but now may be the time. You're going to be unraveling everything with these artifact mods, especially when paired with Final Warning. Now, there are other good sidearms you should be using. Of course, you've got your OGs like Eidetic Kindness with Bolt Shot. I'm still going to have that on me. You've got Buried Bloodline, which is fantastic and potentially even better in activities like the Nether, considering you can grant yourself Devour. Not really sure how healing's going to work in that activity, especially things like Devour, but considering that Buried Bloodline is a void weapon, it's going to be able to take advantage of artifact mods like Volatile Marksman, Void Flux, and Maligned Harvest, and it's going to have the ability to stun barrier champions. And yes, rocket assisted sidearms are getting hit with some nerfs. Buried Bloodline is actually unaffected by the 30% damage reduction to bosses, vehicles, and mini boss targets, and is actually going to be getting an 8% crit damage buff. Warlord's Ruin is still my favorite dungeon in the game, guys, and between the Void Synergy kit that we have coming, Devour that's naturally given to you with Buried Bloodline's Catalyst, the weakening effect that it can apply to enemies, and the fact that it's getting a buff, what can you not love about this thing? So guys, that is our list of weapons that I'm going to be using come next week in Heresy. Let me know in the comments below what you think. I'm also trying to get a list of builds that I think are going to be pretty potent come day one, and we'll be putting those out probably in the next day with some dim links so you guys can just plug and go. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.